how my mum and dad met was actually really sweet. My mum was only 16 when she was permitted to go to her very first dance. And so my granny and granddad loved Brendan Bowyer. They allowed her to go only with her older sister, Joan Brennan. And so she went to Sea Point in Galway, and my dad swears that he always swore that he winked at her from the stage. He spotted her from the stage, and she swears she would have taken note if Brendan Bowyer had spotted her from the stage. But then they never met that night, and it wasn't until she was 17, a year later, when my dad was having a holiday in Galway, and she walked into the Oslo hotel, and he noticed her. And she was there for a hop, and he followed her into the ballroom. And of course, everywhere he went, he was asked to go up on stage. So he was dragged up on stage, and my mom does remember seeing him being dragged up on stage. But then when he came down, she was gone. And so he asked the proprietor of the Oslo hotel, Carolyn Shields, who was that girl with Joan Brennan? And she said, "Sure, that's Stella Brennan. She's very young." And he says, "Well, I'd like her phone number." So he actually, I can't believe my dad did this. He had the gall to call my mum's home where her parents are, and asked for, at 1 a.m. in the morning, and asked for a date with my mum. And of course they were all delighted, and they set the date for the following Thursday because she had to go to Lough Derg to pray for her leaving cert results. And yeah, she came back, and my aunt put some makeup on my mum, and they went out on their first date to Sea Point again, and it was to see the Capitol Showband. And that was the beginning of a 3-year courtship and a 56-year relationship. It was at the Galway Cathedral, and at the time that was newly built, and it was 350 people on the invite list, but thousands thronged in the dregs of rain to come and see them get married. In fact, I think there was an RSVP magazine that would do the weddings of the decades, and my mum and dad were the wedding of the 60s, and Prince Charles and Diana were the wedding of the 80s, so we were all very chuffed to get to see that magazine. My mom she often thinks they didn't talk too much about were they nervous or not. My dad wasn't nervous. He was always quite comfortable with a lot of people around and being on stage, being the center of attention. So they went to Spain for their honeymoon. But they were very sad. They came back from Spain to find out that there was a man who was the videographer of the wonderful, so many different parts of it. And he told them he hadn't taken the lens, the cap off the lens, so they don't have the video. I know. Yeah. But they weren't nervous, but my dad's sister, Pat, she says to them before she's going down the aisle in front of my mom, "I don't think I can do this. I can't do this." And my mom says, "Do what?" Earliest memories of my dad, he was an amazing father. He really looked us in the eye and cared so much about the little things. I really didn't I was going to school with Wayne Newton's daughter. It wasn't unusual for us to have an entertainer as a father. I was going to school with cocktail waitresses as parents, children of cocktail waitresses and dealers, and plenty of entertainers. So it really wasn't unusual. And so when we were growing up, we weren't allowed to see him performing because it is a very adult town. You have to be 21 before you can go in. Although there was a time when I was a teenager and he would forget his stage shoes, I remember, and I brought the shoes in. I drove in and brought the shoes in, and I kind of snuck behind the curtain, and I was just so happy to be talking to my dad backstage and then watching him from the wings. Yeah, he always did this Mother's Day concert when we were growing up, which was pretty special. It was a big showroom in Vegas, and he always had a tribute to my mum, and we were very chuffed watching him performing on Mother's Day. And then, of course, Paddy's Day was a big day in our house in Las Vegas, because we always got the day off school, and my dad was often the Grand Marshal of the Paddy's Day parade in Las Vegas, and it would end downtown Las Vegas, and he'd do this big block party, and he'd be the main attraction there. So we got a glimpse of him on stage. But often when we go back to Ireland was when we would get a sense of his celebrity, and also how appreciated he was back there. But that was our opportunity to get to see him performing. It's so interesting. Is there a difference between him on stage and off? I think what I would notice about my dad on stage was how all of these other people in the audience didn't know him, but they knew him. And they knew him in a way that I felt I knew him. It was such an intimate experience watching him on stage that I couldn't believe how much he exposed of himself. And when he was off stage, I suppose the difference would be that he was a great listener, and he was very comfortable being quiet and just listening and letting me or my sister or brother take the center stage, and we felt like a star in his eyes. But as good a listener as he was, he could be talking to a fan 5 seconds before he'd go on stage, and didn't need much prep, because he was always the same person. He wasn't, trying to change his persona. As much as that, he definitely worked very hard on his craft and rehearsed a lot for his tours. But he was, he was very much the same person on stage and off. There was this warmth that he would have when you're sitting having a coffee with him that he exuded on stage, that I think all of us can recognize, yeah. There were times in Las Vegas I would recognize it, and there were times in Ireland that it hit me too. I'd say I remember in high school seeing my dad's name on the Barbary Coast right there on the Strip. I was so used to seeing that. It wasn't far from our home, and I remember having a friend in the car with me saying, "That's your dad?" And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." But really, when we were back in Ireland one time, my sister and I were in a rental car with my dad, and I think it hit us when he ran into a double-decker bus, and the guy came off really disgruntled, and then he saw that it was my dad, and it was fine. He just said, "Please sing us the Hucklebuck," and we're on O'Connell Street. Just my sister and I look at each other like, "Oh, this is not how it would go in Vegas at all." This actually has happened more than once. There was another time he was going around a bend in rural Ireland, and he literally drove into somebody's living room through the door, and they were fine because they just said, "Sing the Hucklebuck." It's not the first time, just the bus. So my dad's mum, Maura, passed before I was born, but she definitely deserves an awful lot of credit because she handled all of his fan mail. And my opa, my dad's father, Stanley, he passed when I was about 1. And so I've heard an awful lot of stories about him from my dad, as well as my dad's 3 sisters, Alison, Olive, and Pat. They have a lot of reverence for him, but of course I've also heard a lot of stories about him from other people too.
Anything on the Hucklebuck, and then I'll ask for your version.
For my version of my, oh God. God, we're all very grateful for the Hucklebuck. It was always great fun to see my dad playing around with it on stage. I never got tired of it. And he never got tired of it. He never got tired of any of the songs he sang. He just loved what he did. Oh, it's so funny. I can't believe it wasn't played at my wedding, because my dad and my sister Aisling were my wedding entertainers. And of all things, I didn't have them sing the Hucklebuck, which is surprising, but he dedicated and put a lot of work into the songs that he did sing for my wedding. And so I suppose, but no, we didn't do the Hucklebuck. And Brendan Jr. also, no, we didn't do the Hucklebuck. What can we tell you about the Hucklebuck? I guess just, yeah, that it's always just great fun. It was on, one of the stories about the Hucklebuck, I think it was not, my dad certainly didn't expect it to be as big a hit as it was. I think it was on a B-side, perhaps, am I right? I think it was on a B-side, and they just said, let's put this down on a track, and it just took on a life of its own. And it's, yeah, it's pretty special that is synonymous with the Showband era, and it's so synonymous with my father too, yeah. I went to see a play at the Abbey, the Peacock, and it was about the Showband era, and they had the Hucklebuck playing in the background, and I was like, wanted to nudge the strangers next to me. That's my dad. And another time I was at a play in New York, and it was an Enda Walsh play, and it was I think the ballroom. What's the name of that play? With Rosaline Linehan, and it was also playing some of my dad's music, which was so mind-blowing, because I got to do a film with Rosaline just 2 years ago, and you know, full circle moments. What I loved about what my dad didn't take himself too seriously. You know, he when he was a heartthrob, because I can look back and say, wow, Dad was a heartthrob. When he was a heartthrob, I don't even think he took himself too seriously then. I don't know, maybe he just didn't know it. But as he grew older, I don't know if the longevity of his career might have something to do with the fact that he didn't take himself so seriously, and he would have a lot of fun on stage, and, you know, pull his shirt over to do the Elvis medley, and, you know, just kind of be a parody of himself to a certain extent. But also, I'd say the longevity of his career could have been the fact that he was successful in Las Vegas, and he and my mom created a lovely life for themselves with community and everything, but they always wanted to be back in Ireland. And they would often go back for summers for a tour, or he'd go back at Christmas and then summer, and it would be these paid holidays where he could also enjoy seeing his sisters, and my mum could see her brothers, and they could be in Ireland. And I would say that it was win-win. They enjoyed being in Las Vegas and the life they had there, but they always knew that Ireland was around the corner almost every year. They were back there, and the appreciation, it was very gratifying for him to be back in Ireland and feel some of the impact that he had. And he loved hearing the stories that fans would tell him, either, you know, whether it was from long ago or more, you know, more current events. He just loved connecting with his fans. Well, Las Vegas was a much smaller town in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s than it is now. So all of the celebrity, I think it was a 200,000 person population. And so all of the celebrities after work would often do jam sessions. They'd meet up at 3 a.m. and do a jam session till 6 or 7 a.m. So I know he really loved that. And of course, the celebrities of that time in Las Vegas were Elvis and Frank Sinatra and Wayne Newton, and you know, it was for per capita you have a lot of celebrities around. But he also, because it's Las Vegas, so many visitors go to Vegas, and he took a lot of pride in picking somebody up from the airport, bringing them to the Hoover Dam, to Lake Mead, and a lot of the entertaining would happen outside the house because people want to see Las Vegas. Or, for instance, there would be people coming into his show all the time. So we have a wall of fame in our house with the amount of people that my dad would have the honor of meeting. And I guess, now as an adult looking back, he never mentioned it. Like, there could be a lot of pretty exciting things happening while I was sleeping, and he'd wake up and pick me up at tennis the next day, It's really normal for him, yeah. I think it was probably also very exciting to him that so many people do go to Las Vegas, so it was almost like he didn't have any distance to go. They came to the Strip, and they'd pop in oftentimes to see him. Yeah. Oh gosh, offstage. Well, even though he was working from his first show in Vegas would have been at 9 p.m., he'd leave the house at 8. We're going to bed. We get up, we're at school. He'd be there to pick me up from school and bring me to tennis. And pick me up from tennis, we'd have dinner together, and then he'd go off to work. So we were able to manage having quite a bit of time with him when he was in Las Vegas. There were times when he was touring for 6 months of the year, he was gone, and that was hard. We missed him quite a bit, and there was one time he was gone for 2 years, and he'd come back for a holiday. So a lot of credit goes to my mom during those times. But he was very into sports, and he loved following Irish rugby and football and tennis, and he was an avid reader. He read sometimes a book a night, especially on tour. When he was touring, he'd read an entire book a night, whether it was history, American politics, Irish history. So he was an avid reader, big movie buff, and he would, in the later years, go for a lot of walks and a lot of chats. Probably our favorite thing to do as a family was, he had an amazing sense of humor, and we could all just sit there in our front room and listen to him tell stories, really, but we would share too, and we would just roll around on the floor and for hours just have story after story in our front room. So he was a great storyteller. My dad had a great appreciation for Irish artists of all kind, and he wanted to do a tribute album to the Irish singers and songwriters, which he did. It's called Follow On with Universal, and I think he did Hot House Flowers, U2, did Fairy Tale of New York, and he did some Van Morrison, and Boomtown Rats. It's a great album. Well, yeah, some perks with my dad. Let's see. I guess the biggest perk was what a big cuddly teddy bear he was. But other perks that came along were that, like say when Bono or U2 were coming to town, he would make sure to help get all of us tickets backstage, all of our friends to come. I mean, we went to so many U2 concerts. It was Vegas, LA, New York, Dublin, and we'd get to go backstage, and it was incredible. And Bono and Paul McGuinness were incredibly generous to always get us backstage, and all of our friends. We'd bring an entourage of friends, and I know my dad probably would have loved to have more intimate conversations with Bono, but he knew that he wanted his kids and all of his band members and their kids to get the opportunity to see him and be backstage with him. So it was really cool. His heyday was obviously when he was in his 20s, 30s, and then their first 8 years in Las Vegas were apparently phenomenal. But I really think my dad's most cherished moments were when he was with my sister on stage. Sorry. So I think my dad's pride in all three of us was felt by all of us, but it was incredibly moving to see how taken he was by watching my sister performing right next to him. He always joked that he was just so happy that all three of us just liked him. But I think it must have really dazzled him to see that his daughter she's a profoundly beautiful singer. She had her own show in Laughlin and Reno, and she sang with him for many years in Las Vegas, and then toured with him in Ireland, and eventually took over managing for him when Connie Lynch passed away. And so she was his right arm, and I think she now feels like she's lost one of her limbs, you know, because they were very close. They had a very, you know, they just read each other's minds. On stage, she'd get his back. if he had a cold, she'd get that high note for him, and it was so fun because I knew kind of some of the behind the scenes stuff. To watch them interplay was a lot of fun. Well, he was drinking for the first 8 years of my life, so I was pretty young when he got sober. And so much of what I remember before he was sober were just the shakes, but he was more like a maintenance drinker. And I'd say what happened when he got sober was really like the blinders were off, and maybe he seemed distant before and just became more and more engaged and interested in all of us. And he was so proud of his sobriety, but he didn't pontificate about it. He really understood how challenging it is for anybody to get sober. But he was always there for anybody who called, who was having an issue with drink. And he would talk to them, you know, as another alcoholic to an alcoholic, to try to help them. Because he talks a lot about when he first went into rehab, or he did talk a lot about when he first went into rehab, and it was the kindness of these people who were sharing their stories with him about their own path to recovery, and he just couldn't get over the kindness of these strangers who didn't know him as any celebrity or anything, and it woke him up. And they were very challenging years. In fact, I think even just when he first came out of rehab, my mom talks about what a shell of a person he was, because he really needed that rehab. It was very, very close to death. And I remember walking into that rehab and seeing him very unwell. And when he came out, he had to go back to the Strip and work, you know, from 9 p.m. until 3 a.m. Those are not hours that a lot of people are not lubricating themselves. But he never went back to it, and I think he really was proud of that. One more thing, I believe December 1st was the anniversary of his sobriety. It would have been 37. It would be 37 years this December 1st when he would, yeah. There was an intervention done, and the doctor said to him, Brendan, and my mom went with him, and she got a few people because obviously she put up with a lot. And I'm sure she was terrified of being a young widow. And the doctor said to him in the intervention, Brendan, you won't be here in 6 months. You know, they were getting ready to go to Hawaii. And so he said, you can either go to Hawaii or you can go to rehab and have a life. So he woke up. He had such a long career. He was just so happy that he was still singing at 70, I think 6 or 7, you know, and he was on stage in Dublin having a hard time breathing. And the last thing, I don't remember him ever canceling a show or, you know, calling in sick. If he had laryngitis somehow, he'd get up there. But he finished off that show. But the reality is the quality of his life up until the very end was really good. He was so sharp cognitively. My dad's recall for names and dates and sports was up until the very end. We did an interview together at a radio station in Ireland that his recall was astounding, and that was just days before he went into the hospital. He was in the hospital for 10 days, and when they finally allowed Las Vegas to open up visitors, my sister went in first, and she put us all on FaceTime, and we could see he wasn't doing well. But then I started to sing to him. I'm the only one in the family who doesn't sing, and I started to sing to him. And my sister says, "Dad, if you want Clodagh to stop singing, please open your eyes." And that's something I hold to me, because he opened his eyes and he looked at me, and I got to thank him and say goodbye and thank him for his incredible integrity and what an amazing father he was. And we all did. We all got to say goodbye and could feel this peace in the room. And then my mom came in and she was with him and she was holding his hand. And it was a beautiful, unbelievably beautiful passing, that even though the circumstances seem like you can change these things, why did this happen? I don't doubt that it was his time, because it was a very special moment for all of us to feel so privileged to witness his last breaths. I mean, this probably won't make it to the, but when I was doing my master's in NYU, I did a report on my dad, and I was able to recognize the impact that he had on, Ireland was in a depression and they weren't dancing, and he got the whole country up to dance and come out of their homes and congregate and have community again and play. And I think that was really impactful on the country, but it was really special to him. That seems to be going down in the history books for him. And that said, his musical director wrote my mom a letter since his passing, and he said he hadn't written a letter in 30 years, but he wanted to write this letter. And he said there were some times when we would maybe travel abroad, and all the band thought this was a vacation and might not put the rehearsal in. And so sometimes what was going on with the instruments behind him was mayhem. And he said, how do you handle, he said he had a conversation with my dad, how do you handle that when it's just mayhem and you still sometimes play a blinder and connect with them? And he said, "Jim, I just stand in my light and smile." And I just think that's really my dad. When things went wrong, he just stood in his metaphorical light and smiled. What do I want his legacy to be? I think that covers it. Do you think?
I think so. Is there one particular song that brings your dad back into the room for you? Is there a song that you just put on when you want to feel him near you?
I know that he sang and recorded "The Wonder of You" to my mom in Abbey Road in London, and he sang that song so beautifully, and he sang the wind beneath your wings, the wind beneath my wings, so beautifully. So there's so many songs that make me think of my dad, really. Certainly Fairy Tale. He always sang Fairy Tale with Aisling. So I have a great video I was going to send you, Sinead, of him singing it. I don't know if you want it, but it's him and my sister and my poor daughter trying to get a word in. But the two singers were like, yeah. What else? He sang Galway Bay and Danny Boy so beautifully. So many songs.
You sing Galway Bay.
To my children. To my children.
I'm going to hold you to that when you're back in Ireland and coronavirus has disappeared.
Yeah, I'll sing in a pub, sure. Not on RTE. My poor dad would turn over. This is his tribute.
So I think that's everything. I mean, unless there's stuff you want to add, but I think you've covered everything and you've covered it really beautifully. I'm just,
Thank you. Oh, good.
you know, ripping my hair out that our program is short, but the material won't be wasted.
Oh, well, good. Let me see. You know, even though my mom was always my dad's wife, a lot of people went up to my dad and said, "Do you realize you have quite a catch on your hands?" Because she wasn't just stunning. She really is so beautiful inside and out, and he knew he had a catch. It may have been initially physical attraction, but she also has a lot of merits to her name. She and my brother won the U.S. national title Mother and Son in 1986, and she's a tennis champion, and she really had her own life. She was able to build her own community in Las Vegas, and my dad just marveled at her. He adored every breath she took, and I think Brendan Jr. Ashling and I just feel like we really got a front seat to maybe, you know, a pretty special marriage. Sorry, I can't do it without crying.
That was perfect, Claude. It was lovely.
Thank you.
Really, really nice.
Thank you.